be all in person or all on Zoom. I hate hybrid. Yep.
Hi, how are you? Are you on the computer?
Not in person. There we go. So that's where.
Yes. Go right ahead. Yeah. Here's like this is Alexa. So it includes other, and then also here's the land use
Oh, thank you so much.
principles too that have some housing stuff. So it's just interesting looking at that as like a reflector to see like not so that we're not just like starting from scratch on the ideas of like, what kind of principles do we want, but then also we don't have to, this was Alexa's, she did a process, put it together, like we don't have to be like, oh, we have the same principles, but we can have different. And yeah, also
At 6:30, I'm going to start the webinar.
The principles also kind of important. If there's stuff on like climate stuff that it's not necessarily in the content purview, but it's still kind of.
No. So Pat is on as a panelist. And we have one attendee. So. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call roll. If you're joining us on Zoom, please make sure to unmute yourself, acknowledge your name, and then mute yourself again. Let's start with Antoinette Martinez. Thank you. Jeremy Kaplan. Thank you. Sylvia Augusto. Damien Andrade. Julia Bailey. Gladys Bruno. Justin Campos. Richard Codor. Carrie Conti. Thank you. Erin Key. Maria Roca. John Santori. Michael Fay. Fay Walker. Tom, excuse me. Fay Walker. We're combining people. Makes it easier for a quorum.
The count is 2.
You're too shy of a quorum.
Okay.
Yeah, Pat, I acknowledge your attendance.
Hi, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us for tonight's housing committee meeting. I'm Martina. Really appreciate you all for being here in person and on time. For the folks that are on the line, really appreciate you also taking the time to join. So for today, what we're going to be doing is expanding on our meeting from, I want to say maybe 3 weeks ago. And what we're going to be doing is just outlining housing principles and topics that we'd like to cover over the next, in the short term and long term. Really was planning for this to be a working meeting, so we're going to try our best to incorporate folks that are joining online. But the focus for today will be sort of just conversation and again, working meeting. So let's see here. Did you want to introduce anything?
Sure. Yeah.
Please pass the mic.
Yeah, we figured that we might as well start a little bit with the Alexa's land use principles, and if anybody had any questions or thoughts about them. And I think that again, this process, the CB7 housing or land use wasn't necessarily involved with this process. But Alexa went out and engaged some people, and I think that there are some people from the housing committee, I think like John Santori, who are a part of the process. And so, yeah, it is, actually, again, when we look back on it, it's there, when you look at it, there's actually a lot more beyond housing that's on there. And I would say this just, I think actually the housing part could even be more specific, but I'm curious if anybody has thoughts on, I think it's fascinating to see that the first one is proposals on city-owned land must be affordable with the AMI housing levels, and I think like that's obviously a priority, and I think that's something to keep in mind for current rezonings coming up. But I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts on, anything just within the housing stuff. And I noticed too, like the last meeting that we had, Damien brought up the idea of public banking, and Alexa mentioned that too, but that's on a state level, that a public bank, but that could be a priority of something that we discuss. I know that Jamie brought it up in our last meeting. That was something that he was interested in. But yeah, I don't know if does anyone have any thoughts just scanning so far.
I'm just sharing the link with folks who are joining online.
Oh. So we just figured we'd look over Alexa's land use principle to start off so that we're not all beginning from scratch again. And then also then, not, we weren't involved in creating them, but it is interesting.
Hi, and also I understand that the audio is a little hard to hear. We'll try our best, but again, the next meeting is going to be a working meeting in person, so it might be a little hard to hear, and I apologize in advance. We'll try our best. And also, I just want to point out that, the reason why we're sitting here and doing all of this together is because, I'm chair of the committee and Jeremy is co-chair, but we don't want to dictate what the meetings are going to be without consulting the public and committee members. So we want this to be something that we're working on together.
Just to reiterate, this is,
We need you to come up.
the idea is that the committee builds something like this. And this, it kind of, does it follow this format? Does it address the same kinds of things so that there's an additional guidelines that the board is able to refer to when these kinds of processes come up? That's the idea, General.
And I think also I'd just say that we're maybe thinking too about what is practical for us to be working on. I know last year we had thought about a lot of educational things, and so that was part of our principles, was like how to be more out in the public, doing things. We tried to propose, some different things around tackling like what is AMI, how is affordability really defined. And so thinking like, if we wanted to put that forward as part of our principle of like, working to educate the community on these issues and doing these kind of like forward-facing events. And we've done a couple over the years, but then I know last year too, there was also a proposal about fire safety issues, and had a lot of fires, people knowing their rights after that. So that was something, and seeing like elected officials hold, meetings and community events about that, but just thinking about that's another angle to this idea of the priorities is like also what do we want the housing committee to be working on? And then if we can go back to the priorities and being like, well, we all agreed upon, like we want to see like more education, more people aware or involved with these issues. That, then we have that listed as a priority, and that like when we're talking about planning events or doing something that we can fall back to that.
So.
Yeah.
Hard to
Yeah.
So basically what you're proposing is that it goes beyond this and it's more like a strategic plan for the year, and one part of it would be these principles.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that's what you think too.
Yeah.
I'm checking.
Yeah. I mean, we're not.
Open, we don't want to dictate stuff. I want to have. Also, I'm not sure how many people in the community have ever like that. So that's another thing. So this is probably the first time that people are actively setting and but so maybe we just want to take time and like this together and say, do we even agree with what's on here? Just because there are rezoning proposals on the table that may happen before, this year's end, that will follow what's on, within the document. Thank you, clear.
So, being that I'm also on land use, this is actually amazing consolidated list of, items that the community cares a lot about. And, it's interesting because I feel like when we have the land use meetings to discuss new properties, a lot of those stem from this, or the questions from the public stem from these points. I wonder if it would be possible, if it's not already, to put this on the website or make this into, like, incorporate this into, would it be possible to incorporate it into the meeting notes or something so that it's a little more visible? And then maybe that would be a way to, like, get it on record. So that, I mean, this is also a guideline for people that have never looked at this before, like in the public to.
If you wanna ask the rest of the, like, have the rest of our office present with this?
That would be fantastic,
Yeah, I mean,
because that would cover a lot. There are quite a few of the land use and housing things that are coming up this year. Yeah, I wonder if it's worth, meeting with families or that there as well. If someone from someone's office did come to think about how we would adopt it into a broader document. I guess the two questions that I have open here are, I think one, just in thinking about the recent proposals that we see, I think, with the developers' engagement with the community, was also where there was like a lot of challenges and where it felt like there was gaps. I don't think just like into that, so not just like here around the development itself, but also the engagement process. Other question is just around some definitions, and I don't want to be too prescriptive or like define something that's like hard and fast across the board, but like some of the questions I would have would be around like deep affordability, also around preventing corporate landlords, right? Like how we find corporate landlords and so almost every building is C. So I think there's like a couple definitions that you don't have to like define for every single instance, but there's a lot of value in just kind of digging into them a little bit. Yeah.
So just wanna mention on page 4, there is,
There is.
so on page 4, there's a community engagement.
Thank you.
So for both on the line, if you're following, we're looking through the land use principle, document that was shared in the chat. And we're on page 4, looking at the community engagement.
If I may. I just want to make sure that, we incorporate our other council members into this discussion, even though the vast majority of the district overlaps with Alexis Felix's district.
Yeah.
We have 2 other council members who may have different principles. We may want to speak with them as well.
yeah. Yeah, I think, last year, Alexa actually came when we discussed, city, yes, should we have a conversation about these principles? But that's a really good point, Jeremy, that, we dealt with that our land rezoning and, that was with Rahana. So it would be interesting to, and I know that people in the Paris asked Rahana if she had some, like Alexa, and they were like, it would be nice to see you have a clear cut. So it would be really nice to have them and yeah, because like, Alexis district has changed so much around and our city council, our community board district has stayed the same. So it used to be the case that it was just like one city council member. So that's.
The only thing I would add on that, do we know if they have any land use proposals?
No,
We don't know if they have. Okay.
Yeah, I know Shahana doesn't because I remember in the conversation around Maryland, people asked if there was more clarity and they were like, I would love to see something like what Alexa.
Susan Long also has a good portion of the district.
To state the obvious, she had much different principles than Alexa and Shahana, so that would be interesting. I'm just curious if she even did that on top of this. But. I just, I guess right now, John, we're just looking through the land use to kind of, reorient ourselves. And right now, we're just talking about the community engagement part. I remember the last meeting that we met at, that from some of the notes I had, I remember that Elise brought up the notion of like principle around community engagement and, asking, getting the developer to be much more engaged. And so we were just looking right now at Alexa's community engagement and what she states. And I think from that conversation that we had 3 weeks ago, and what Elise stated, I think what other people said, I actually kind of feel like Alexa's community engagement, there could be more details. It's on page 4 at the bottom. But yeah, I do feel like from what we've seen and the rezonings that have come up, that people have said they've had early engagement. Like there's this St. Rocco's rezoning on 27th Street. They said they were coming to us early, and then within that hearing, they mentioned that they've already been talking about this for 9 months with a nonprofit developer. So to me, that signals that they're not coming to us early because they've had at least 9 months of conversation with an entity within Sunset Park. So it feels like we should be, as soon as there is an engagement with the church, with the nonprofit, Alexa's office, the community board should be notified within a few days or weeks that these conversations are happening and not like 9 months later. Yeah.
Hi, sorry, I'm late. Hello, I'm John Santor, I live on 23rd Street, I'm a renter. I've been in Sunset Park since 2016. Four apartments, always with roommates, always as a renter. I don't own property, I don't intend to own property. Where do I have the capacity to own property in the community? I'm sorry, just clarification, do we have quorum?
No.
One short?
Too short.
You're sure.
Okay. Sorry,
one now.
You started the conversation by talking about community. I guess this is community engagement regarding ULURP specifically, or just in general.
Let's go back after the bunker.
The reason I asked, and just clarification, so I would like to understand the leverage that a council person has regarding this in terms of, so this might change on Tuesday, right? Because obviously we have a ballot measure that's attempting to directly strip the council member of aldermanic privilege, well, that's what they call it in Chicago, of member deference. So if that ballot passes, as I understand it, the council member will no longer have the ability to effectively stop a land use proposal. They can just be overturned by alternate committee. So that might change, but as things stand, if that doesn't pass, somebody made a comment at a previous meeting, I can't remember who it was, that a council member can't establish preconditions for a ULURP because then they can be sued. I have this idea in my head. I'm trying to figure out that if a council member just upfront says, I'm not approving any ULURP that doesn't have X, Y, or Z, that they can then be sued by the developer for a failure to give the developer access, effectively fair access to the ULURP process. I asked that in relation to this, like in other words, you can have a set of principles, but how stringent can those principles be, and how much leverage do they actually provide to the council member? community, such that if the community wanted to demand the council person, we demand that you don't even consider, a proposal that doesn't do X, Y, or Z. Is that in fact also like a non-starter? I just want to make sure that I didn't imagine this or.
I think that was Michelle DeLowe.
Right, I thought she said that too.
Yeah, and I think what you're referencing was that it was in the CBA meeting or one of those where Michelle mentioned that that's a possibility. The interesting thing is, I don't know, and I'm saying this from my own, experiences, but I haven't heard of a process where that's actually happened. And there's been a number of ULURPs where city council members have laid out very strict, conditions. Like for instance, in Harlem, the 145 rezoning, which was Christian Richardson. This was a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. She laid out that it had to be, I think it was like 50 or 55% affordable and at specific levels because she was like, otherwise this doesn't meet the affordability for the Harlem community that she was representing. And the developer did not meet that. And then I know that Julie Wong in Queens also set, affordability levels as conditions. It's pretty common that a council member will say, these are the affordability levels that I think we should get or we want. And I sort of speculate during that Arrow Linen rezoning that it seemed like Shahana had numbers concede that she wanted. And I guess she wasn't forthcoming about it to us. But it's pretty common practice for elected officials to come in and say, these are what I want and what I'm looking for because it's a negotiation process. I think it makes it more transparent.
So can I just add one other comment? So then if that's the case that in fact elected officials do have significant leverage over these, and even if the member deference is overturned, and if that proposal does pass, even in that case, you still have elected officials, right, who would have control. The borough president would be one, and I forget the exact panel. But you would still have elected officials who could theoretically be subject to public pressure. So, I mean, I consider this one, applicants must begin the outreach process well in advance of ULURP certification. ULURP also, the timeline might be changed, might be shortened. So if the timeline for ULURP is short, or even if it's not, either way, I think that's very important because, and again, I've heard just looking here multiple rezonings, I've heard people on the community board, people community, people running for office, people in office say ULURP is broken, by which I think they mean that it is too difficult for the community members to access a proposal compared to the technical expertise, resources, and money of the applicant. That's their full-time job. They know what is going on. They may produce a very, they have consultants. And a community member has none of those things, does not have access to any of those resources, and is expected to have an informed opinion. So, yeah, beginning the outreach process in advance of ULURP certification, I think very important. I agree with what Jeremy said. That it's regrettable that in the case of St. Rocco's, it appears that the Brooklyn Diocese has to date has held no public meetings on that proposal, that it engaged in private conversations with Watermark Capital, that it signed a lease with Watermark Capital, no public conversation, that it then engaged the Fifth Avenue Committee for many months with no public conversation. Then they finally in June said, okay, well, here's a proposal, which was already fully formed. They already designed the building, they had the state, they had the size of the building, they sited the building, they designed it architecturally, and they said, here's our proposal. Right? So, yeah, I think particularly that's a critical one. And sorry, I'm talking so much. The community must demand this as well. Unfortunately, the land use committee has not met since June on this matter. And now it is October 29th, and supposedly this could get certified in November after the election. And so all of that lead time, as minimal as it was, has now been lost. And so I think community members must demand better. They must demand not just applicants to do this, but they themselves need to meet. And of course, you don't have to wait for e-work. I mean, that site's been sitting there for years and years and years. Everybody sees it. And everybody knows where it is. You don't have to wait for e-work. You can proactively talk about these things.
I just really wanted to comment on the first point that you made about the ballot proposal that we're voting on Tuesday. Thank you for bringing that up because, yeah, that could really turn this upside down. So are folks here familiar with those ballot proposals at all? Or, okay. All right, so. Yeah, you want to? Okay, so I quickly looked them up, and have like a quick overview, so I'll just go. There's going to be, I think, five. There's six.
Six questions.
So there's six altogether, but there's three that are focused on housing. So ballot question 2. This one will do, and I'm just reading it right from here. It's going to do 2 things. It'll allow for a faster zoning process that will run through the board of standards. It'll be board members will be appointed by the mayor, and they'll oversee 100% publicly financed, 100% affordable housing projects. And the goal would be to get the project approved or rejected within 120 days. So within that process, the application would be filed to the Board of Standards and Appeals. It would then go over to the community board for review and recommendation. And it says the community board review process would be 60 days. The BSA would hold a public hearing within 30 days, and then the BSA would issue a decision within 30 days. Yeah. Just, okay, and that is in compare, so our current process, we go through the community board, then it goes through the borough president, so the community board has 60 days. The proposal then goes to the borough president, the borough president reviews it for 30 days, and at every step, there is a public hearing. Then from there, it goes over to the city planning commission for 60 days, city council for 50 days, and then the mayor has 5 days, and they can decide whether they'd like to, they have veto power. And then, depending how things go, the city council, they have an override authority. So that's the existing process right now. So this would definitely shorten this. As those number of days off, but.
And my biggest complaint about this is that there's zero stipulation or guidelines around the level or deep level of affordability. The biggest issue that we've had in housing is not like deeply affordable housing. And so the fact that it essentially allows and sort of enshrines like, quote, the affordability is anything as MIH, and we know that MIH has been like, has, you know, that idea of like, we could do 80% AMI affordability at 100% in a lot of neighborhoods that they would be targeting, that would be unaffordable. And so, and then the fact that cutting out the community board and cutting out the city council to fast track actually hurts it, because in a lot of ways, every single rezoning that I've been a part of in the last couple of years in the community, we've improved the affordability on everything and gotten deeper levels of affordability, whether it's the library, whether it's the totem rezoning, whether it's the Arrow Linen rezoning. Every time, like, and so this is where I think this it becomes really problematic, that a lot of people see community boards as being this negative thing when actually it's the makeup of the community board. If you have a good community board that cares about affordability, we fought for better affordability. And so fast tracking stuff with just the bare minimum actually doesn't help a community like Sunset Park. And a lot of the communities that maybe could be fast tracked. And that's kind of the problem, is that we've seen a lot of times like well-intentioned ideas around putting more affordable housing in Black and brown communities, like the Blasio did a lot of rezonings in East New York that ended up actually creating more gentrification because the levels of affordability weren't what the community needed, and it was actually, AMI levels of 80 to 130, and in East New York or in Sunset Park, those are all higher a lot of times than market rate housing. So it becomes a gentrifying impact versus actually being rebuilding. And so that's my big issue with a lot of these proposals, is that it treats all affordable housing as the same when we know that an 80% AMI housing in Manhattan is not the same as one in Sunset Park or East New York or Brownsville or other, or the Bronx, South Bronx or other areas of the Bronx. And so that kind of specificity really is so important. And so that's why I'm voting no on these, because I think that we could do much better. And that we need to be very precise that like we need to be building affordable housing, but we need to emphasize deeply affordable housing, and none of the proposals will talk about that. And they can't really address that because it's not just a land use thing. So.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Did anybody want to comment on ballot proposals?
Now, do we know what our local elected officials, do they all have positions on these?
I don't know off the top of my head if they did,
The entire, city, I don't know about locals, but the city councils vote no on these, of course, because it takes power away from them, so. Sorry, did you all hear me? I didn't hear.
It's for the record. Yeah.
The city council in general says to vote no, because of course it takes power away from them, so. You're way more knowledgeable than I am, but I think, there's two sides to this, and also it's very, on just the mayor, right? So you have a good mayor, this could be better. You have a mayor that's not great, this could be much worse.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have a question. I'm sorry, you're probably not super housing experts, but in case anyone knows the answer to this, but how many, developments because of the current process just get shut down altogether and just never get built? Because, yeah, and especially in this district.
I don't know the district. I know that citywide, something that council members are saying is that like 80+% of developments are eventually approved that mandatory inclusionary housing, but the argument against that is that it's not about the percent that are approved, it's about the larger developments that are never brought forward and say that they wouldn't be approved. But I think 87 is the say.
Not sure if you know anything about it, but how about the community board districts that they just don't have as many proposals reaching them?
So I don't know which ones don't have the proposals reaching them, but I know the Furman Center released something on what are the districts that don't have as many affordable, the 12 districts. And when I was looking at it at a glance, it's not necessarily the high income neighborhoods, right? It's a lot of neighborhoods that are lower income communities of color that haven't had as many developments in them. So it's not even necessarily addressing the need to build more housing in higher income.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing that that I saw was basically there's only two areas in Manhattan, and it's the Upper West Side and Upper East Side. And so it's funny because the fast tracking treats Upper West Side and Upper East Side the same way as outer borough Queens, where you actually, and it doesn't really consider the affordability levels in those neighborhoods, where you know, in Jamaica, Queens, you can get an apartment for $1,500 or $2,000 that isn't necessarily, you know, an MIH new building, but is actually, you know, existing building, and it's a lower density neighborhood, yes. But it still is a much more affordable neighborhood because of, you know, various things like lack of transit, being car dependent, being far out, job opportunities and things, that also, of course, racism, redlining, and lots of other stuff. But the fact that fast tracking is going to impact a lot of those neighborhoods and is not focused on like you know, okay, it's good that Upper West Side and Upper East Side are in there, but those are the only two ones out of the 12 that feel like, oh, these are rich neighborhoods that need to be building more affordable housing. It's actually a lot of like very working class neighborhoods. And there is a chunk of Staten Island too on there, but yeah, let me pull up I can send, yeah, I can send that. And this was actually based off of they do it every 5 years.
These are the 12 that have built the least.
These are, yes, and again, this is the problem I think with metrics of it's just who has built the most quote affordable housing in the last 5 years. The problem is that also ends up being a lot of districts that have just built a lot of MIH housing or have high density, and people have been taking like, you know, the affordability bonuses and like, so yeah, in neighborhoods that are much more low density, they don't have all the same sort of opportunities that developers take the like MIH bonuses because, you know, in the Jamaica Queens, there's still a lot of single family homes, but then there's also, you know, 2 to 4 story buildings, and you don't have these opportunities to do MIH of, you know, an 8 story building and add affordable housing go up to 12 stories. Those kind of opportunities because the zoning is still say, you know, R5, R6, even top person. So it, yeah, it doesn't take into account like all of these specificities for the neighborhood. And that to me is a big problem because I think it recreates the same issue that de Blasio had about building and where you were building, that we built like crazy in East New York from a specific spot rezoning that de Blasio pushed, and East New York has specification. And I remember seeing years ago, you know, people coming into East New York and doing like predatory house flipping, and that's still a big thing because people knew that rezoning was coming and knew that rents would skyrocket from the rezoning. But yeah, let me grab that. I remember seeing that.
I'm trying to find it now. This thing, right?
And yeah, yeah. So some, yeah, that is, yeah. So some of, yeah. So some of Bay Ridge and parts of South Brooklyn, Bensonhurst, would be in the fast track, which is interesting.
I'll pass around the laptop.
What is it today?
So this is a map of the lowest producing community district of affordable housing.
Would you to Jeremy? Would Jeremy open it on Zoom?
Oh, yeah. Should we ask school kids?
Yeah, otherwise I can,
Or maybe I need to.
you're already online. I could give you permission.
Okay.
He's calling the office. Oh, no, you're not online. You can email it to me. The J Valper account, please.
Nice hat, Jeremy.
Thank you. Oh, wear my heart on my head. There is somebody from. There is somebody who's joining us online who would like to add something? If you'd like to read it.
Thank you.
So Gina Sharp wrote, I'd like to add that I agree that the ULEP process is absolutely necessary to get the community's input, and ballot proposals 2 through 4 exclude our voices to stand up for what we really need in our own community. I'd like to add that there should be requirements for building affordable homeownership units and stop creating perpetual renting, owning, helping stabilize many costs, and this. Voting helping stabilize many costs and helps people build wealth and stability for themselves and families.
Thank you, Gia. I personally could not agree more. Okay, Jenny,
You sent it?
yeah.
I need a couple minutes.
Yeah, I guess for me, while Jeremy's pulling it up, it looks like most of Staten Island is on here. Western, lots of parts of Western Queens. We're really surprised to see Bay Ridge on here. Well, surprised not surprised. Yeah,
The stoop, is that it? I would doing that. Let me get out of this. See if that's what's causing it. No, it's not.
you think it's this way?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe it's my.
Oh, maybe that's it next to the mic. Okay. Let's just try that again. Just turn off the mic. It's the mute button.
Got it.
Okay. So here it is. I don't know if you want me to scroll down to.
Yeah, just go down to the map.
Oh, okay. This one?
Yeah,
Okay.
And so the relevance of.
It's not this one, it's pretty the same. Community district, I think you have to scroll down a little bit.
This one.
yeah.
And so the ballot proposal, we just say again, which proposal relates to this and.
Two, it would go, I'm not an expert on it, but it looks like ballot 2 would create a fast track process so that, affordable housing could be built within these districts. And it would follow, like a shorter approval process to expedite building in these areas.
So the whole implication here is that these districts are having projects blocked or that they're just not probably just incentivize more proposals in these districts? Is that the theory? Is that the rationale
That's the
in favor of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I have an issue with this sort of, it's kind of a blunt instrument, is that when you look at it too, the metric is not how much affordable housing is already existing in these neighborhoods and what is the affordability levels already for these neighborhoods. Because at the same time, it's like, yes, I'm not surprised that Bay Ridge is on there, but also in a lot of ways, when you look at the average rents for a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, Bay Ridge still has some of the most affordable apartments and also a lot of rent stabilized apartments in Brooklyn. And then I look at, they have some central Brooklyn areas, which would be like,
That's Borough Park.
what's that?
That's Borough Park. That's Community Board 12.
Yeah. And then, but you also have like Bed-Stuy. I think it's probably whose council district, maybe it's no, I don't think it might be Che Oshide's district that's on there for being fast track, which is like, predominantly, black home ownership area where, density wise, I wouldn't say, oh, this is all single family homes. It's like, it's brownstones and,
There's a school over there as well. Like
yeah.
a university for like student housing.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you look at a lot of these areas and you wouldn't say, oh, these are all like single family homes and we're not building enough here, but you also look at it and be like, well, we're not considering, we've made it preserved a lot of rent stabilized apartments, or these neighborhoods are already existing affordable, they just haven't produced enough housing. They just haven't produced a lot of housing. And so I think that's just not a good metric. Or especially when, of course, like in Manhattan, you could have one project that produces 1,000 units. And then that tips the whole scale. And
It's done per capita.
it is done are they doing it per capita? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I still think that it's not a great metric because it's avoiding the levels of affordability, in an existing neighborhood and also what existing affordable housing is already there. And especially because it's only saying within the last 5 years, it comes out as being pretty arbitrary.
As opposed to like basing it on median price.
Yeah, basically, if other metrics could be what's the median price for a 2-bedroom apartment, how many rent stabilized apartments, how much public housing is in the district, or like how much affordable housing has been lost. And also it feels weird to be like, use a 5-year time span when, it takes a while for housing in neighborhoods and things to change. So 5 years is pretty short. Yeah. So I don't know. It just feels kind of haphazard and just not the right metrics to be using for this kind of thing and to be pushing upon it. And then at the end of the day, like the argument has been that, wealthy neighborhoods are not building enough housing, and basically the only neighborhoods that are wealthy that we're really talking about in this fast tracking are West Side. So, and the other 10 are actually predominantly, and Staten Island parts are maybe more well off, but those are still more affordable than the West Side or East Side. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I know this is the last of just trying to think. Yeah, anyway, thank you so much for bringing that up because these land use proposals, their impact could very much change if these ballot proposals go through on Tuesday and what we're dealing with.
But even if they do, people can still express preferences, they can lobby their elected officials, they can put pressure on elected officials. So like these kinds of principles are still highly relevant because it's still an elected official saying, this is how I think about the issue, this is how I approach the issue. And people can keep that in mind when they choose to engage the elected official, regardless of who is, or the body in question, regardless of the exact process. That's how I was.
Well, I guess I don't know too much about it, but would the council member of the district be mandated to sit on that body making of the approving a land use decision?
No,
No.
it would be a 3-member panel with the mayor's appointee, a borough president appointee, and the city council, speaker's appointee. Which I think would mean that the city would get sued because it's recreating the board of estimate, which was found to be unconstitutional.
Okay, interesting. Well, that throws another wrench in it. My also thought too was that I don't think the borough president should have more power. I think usually the borough president is a figurehead position. And if anything in the ULURP process, I think actually the borough president, if you want to expedite anything, I think the borough president should not be involved. I think you should give more time to community boards and more time to city council. Because again, the borough president is a recommendation. A lot of times they don't really add that much to a ULURP process. And yeah, then I think it's kind of problematic that 2 out of the 3, the speaker is not elected by us. So the
And it's not
speaker,
a citywide official.
yeah, and so that is problematic that then they gain more power when that's actually somebody that is basically just appointed with the city council and is not somebody that we directly elect. Then also the borough president is honestly not races that people really pay that much attention to. It's not usually a competitive race. So yeah, I think it's sort of problematic to be giving more power when oftentimes the city council member we elect, we pay attention to, we care about who we elect as city council. And so we want to, feel like we have a connection to their decision. And I think when you have good council members, like you do have a say, you do have a ability to affect how they vote. And we've seen that, many times. That's what happened with industry rezoning. Then, after many years of pushing and prodding Carlos, he changed his perspective. And so, it demonstrates that if this changes, the member deference would have gone out the window, and industry city rezoning, Carlos Menchaca's say would not the same way. And like what they tried to do after Carlos said no to it was they tried to override him with the rest of the council. We had people like Richie Torres from the Bronx, who has no understanding of our district, trying to make a decision because he's bought by real estate. And so that's why, I think the member deference can be problematic at times, but often it's actually much better what they're proposing right now. But yeah, a lot, there's a lot about the ballot proposals. I guess we can go back into that. Yeah.
We're yeah, it's really grim if this passes on Tuesday. I don't know. I don't know where to go from here. Do you feel like conversations like this are helpful? For me, I feel kind of like really up in the air, especially with how the ballot questions are worded. My worry is that they're not going to really, there's been a push, but I just worry that people don't know too much about it. And the wording seems like a little confusing, so people, if it passes, there'll be a lot of repercussions, especially for every community, but just trying to think in terms of this committee, how we can move forward. Because, it is housing, it is land use. And yeah, just want to hear from you all. Do you think conversations like this are helpful? If you have a proposal for a certain topic that you would like us to carry forward, I know land use was supposed to have a meeting on the ballot proposals. Unfortunately, that meeting didn't happen. We have a couple of days if, through the folks that are here, if you want to do an outreach initiative, I can commit, to maybe doing an outreach. Maybe we can, come up with a handout and stand in front of the subway and try to talk to neighbors, just want to see where we are and maybe leave with some sort of action. I just want to see the temperature check. Anybody wants to?
In general,
In general.
or do you want to go first or circle the mic?
Yeah, so it's a lot. And you don't understand it too well, it's anymore. But I think in giving information and educating our community is very important. So if that's something we can do, then we should. And just so, because the way they design the questions, part of the design like that purposely also, that, people will have questions and sometimes they will just go, just to get it out of the way without having all the information, or at least some information doesn't help either. So I guess doing an outreach, whatever that would be, helps. Yeah, I think conversations like this are helpful. I think, tying this back to like the goal of having some more of a strategic plan, is, and like we've been in land use, we've been in with the council members to try and, cause like I personally like Alexa's policy, but like trying to have one that is not necessarily just tied to hers, but just a broader guideline, I think is a good idea. Gonna be gone from Friday onwards, so like I can't personally commit to any outreach, but I think that idea of like trying to, yeah, do outreach on things like this.
I would, I just think in general, even outside of the ballot proposals, um, at the end of the day, people still have to be involved. I mean, if people are not involved, I think it doesn't matter what the process is, you're not going to get outcomes that you want. And if people are involved, you can get better outcomes. And I think part of that is determining, are people on the same page? Do people have the same values and do they have the same goals? I mean, I think one of the most obvious fault lines when it comes to discussing housing would be renters versus owners. Who owns property in this neighborhood versus who rents property, and is there a disparity in incentives there? Where property values go up, it's good for owners and bad for renters, for example. That's one thing to discuss. Do people have principles about whether we should build housing? Do you think that it's important to increase construction? I mean, that's a lot of these ballot proposals, if I understand them, they're in the context of what's being called the abundance agenda. The abundance agenda is based on a book that Ezra Klein, the New York Times columnist, wrote earlier this year with a guy named Derek Thompson, who's an economist. And they argue in the book that liberal states have failed to build for people. They have failed to build enough housing, enough public transit. They have failed to create, that California and New York are failing their people, that those states are therefore losing population, that the most liberal places in the country are producing some of the worst outcomes. And that's why people are moving to Florida and Texas. And as a response to that, the liberal response should be build, create, make life better for people. And that the way you do that is, for example, making it easier and faster to build new housing. So I think that's the context. So I think people need to have those conversations, try to understand the arguments and agree or discuss. Do we agree with that idea, or do we think that that's not the right approach? So even just people in this community, do they even want to create more housing? I feel like I do. Maybe I'm wrong. So I don't want to talk too much on this, but I think we should, I would encourage this committee and the community to come together as much as possible to talk about all sorts of issues related to housing, the existing housing stock, future housing stock. I mean, there's so many things that like community land trusts, COPA and the TOPA bills. I mean, enormously consequential proposals if they were to pass, that our own elected officials say that they support, at least some of our local elected officials. Shouldn't we be talking about them? And I think one other thing that I think is so important to talk about is just to try to root conversations in real tangible information about the economics of all of this. If you want to build a building, how much does it cost? Does the design affect the cost? What is the difference between 100% affordable? I was just thinking about this because I don't know about this. I don't know about this. And in my mind, if you're talking about rents on 100% affordable versus 25% affordable, what does that mean in terms of the amount of money flowing in? And why does that matter so much to not have 100% affordable? Why is that so economically catastrophic to a project if you reduce the rent by a certain amount? If people don't have access to that information, I think it disempowers all of us and it prevents us from engaging meaningfully in these conversations. And it puts us at the mercy of primarily developers who have the money and the resources, and the expertise to try to move projects. And again, regardless of the ballot proposals, I think that if people come together, they can produce positive outcomes. But if we don't come together and if we don't talk and try to agree on things, I think the average person in the community is not going to get an outcome that they think is beneficial.
So what it was, being on the land use committee and also a part of housing, I mean, it's a pretty ongoing discussion and, kind of group, cooperative collaboration with the two committees. But I think what I'm seeing or what I'm noticing is that a lot of these proposals come very quick, and there always seems to be a question of when to get involved in the process and how. And it's kind of like we're always kind of on the back foot. And obviously that's because of the ULURP process. And then now I really hope it does not get fast tracked, because it's hard enough for us to get the information on the upfront in non-fast track situation. But I think it would be an amazing idea to have like a series of presentations, or one presentation where we could have the council people, all three of them, come together, and then Alexa and Vilas can go through these points, and then also have the other two council member either like add their portion of it or expand on that, and then that way it educates the community like what we're going after, what we're trying for, the principles of intention, good intention. I mean, and then I think it would also be helpful for us to understand, just like it's been discussed here, like what can the council person do? Hopefully that they can still maintain their feasibility of influence in this situation, but it would be helpful, yeah. And I think like maybe if we could do something like a meeting at the library or something. Anybody any questions? We have this many proposals coming up soon. Let's get educated about it before we even see the presentation, just in general. I remember, so during Aralinen, I remember Shahana saying that us against it didn't give her leverage in the negotiation, and I didn't really understand how or what. Like, and so I guess like combining, and I'm not even saying that skeptically, like I just genuinely didn't understand. And so combining that meeting where they walk through either the written out principles or just the kind of the abstract principles, I think would also be helpful to understand as a committee that's trying to advocate for more affordability, how can we help them or just like leverage any recommendation or authority that we do or not.
Thanks. For those of you I need to add with Daniel, just moved to the district. I don't have a strong take on this, but I'm enjoying this next deal. I'm working now, so.
I don't have much to add. I think you made it be good, to have like a set of readings or some shared data to talk from, because, these conversations should be grounded in data, and we haven't really addressed like the data of this district and how I believe, could be wrong, but we really haven't built that much housing in general. And so he is, these principles are also like context specific, right? Like I think personally, I would change my mind on all of these based on a specific proposal. So maybe if we could like collaboratively, I mean, and also to your point, I haven't read this book, but there's a lot of data that also shows what this Ezra Klein book is saying is true, right? As much as there's a lot of data that shows the opposite. So if we could maybe have a shared set of data or essays, I think some of the people who are housing experts, maybe you can point us towards a few that we have, so we have some grounding for these discussions or some kind of shared knowledge. Sorry. I also think that these principles are need to be kind of understood within the context of other elements of business that are coming to the community. For example, the I don't know if it's even still proposed, but the what is it, the movie, the TV,
Steiner Studio.
Steiner Studio. I mean, that's gonna affect.
Yeah.
We would definitely need some more housing if that's, gonna be stationed here, and then also, the IBX. I mean, yeah, I'd like to understand, like, if we could use that as a part of the leverage of, well, like, what you were talking about. And, ask what our council person, or all three of them, can do or use those developing businesses to kind of help us get better and more affordable housing.
Just on that specific point, I mean, I think in general, I feel as though there are so many overlapping consequences to so many of these things that it's very beneficial for communities to work together. I would say, if I speak for myself, rather than wall things off.
Right.
Because an economic development project, of course, impacts housing. A housing project impacts economic development. There's a technical role for the land use committee, but if the land use committee is working on a housing proposal, shouldn't the land use committee work with the housing committee and bring people together to facilitate those conversations? And again, so much of this, in my opinion, is about whether or not this community or any other community has meaningful power to control its future, control. No, it's
Batteries. This thing runs out very quick. No, the batteries.
whether or not community, I'll hand it back. I won't, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna monologue on this. So I've been an opponent of this time to get proposal for a long time, for years now, and it's not just because I think it's some inherently bad idea. But it's, first of all, it's totally unclear if it's ever gonna happen, because it's 2.5 years now beyond the delayed start time. And it had already been delayed multiple times, and it's now, there's no communication at all from EDC or Steiner Studios about that enormous project. But the principle involved is that the Economic Development Committee created that Economic Development Corporation pushed that project forward, and at no point was the community involved at all in deciding that a 900,000 square foot film and television project was to be brought to that site. That level of input was never intended to be part of that project and never was part of the project. And the community was given input on components of the overall Made in New York campus. Even that name had no community input at all. The mayor just renamed. I mean, just like the president renamed the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. Bill de Blasio renamed an entire section of this neighborhood and said, now it's the Made in New York campus. There was no community input. And there was no community input for Steiner Studios. These things have ripple consequences. I think every time a mayor does something like that, and that particular thing happened in 2017, it creates a precedent by which future mayors can say, well, we can just do this. It's not a problem. We'll just have it. We have the power, and we'll just use the power that way. And the last thing on this point, because it's related to housing, it's related to everything else. There was an email that I remember this board received from EDC years ago in response to questions about the Made in Europe campus. And there was just a line in there where an EDC official said, well, this is an as of right project. And they've repeated that over the years. That is a direct statement to the board and to the community that you have no control. It's as of rights, our rights to do what we want. And that this community does not have any control. And I think if every time this community cedes power or fails to object to the taking of power, it is setting itself up for the future use of power in that same way, regardless of what the project is. I think that is undemocratic and everybody's long-term well-being. Maybe short to death.
Just wanted to say, because we were talking about data and the need for it, the data snapshot of CD38 on the third page, third page, yeah. This is really good data on affordable housing development in the district, and this is why we're not part of the project. We are, and has a screen that is 31st, so we're kind of in the middle of the 51, but I think what's really interesting about Alexa's data, which is actually very important, is under the affordable housing development, she also lists that since 2014, 894 affordable units have been preserved across 87 developments. And I think this is where a lot of the, it's a distraction to only focus purely on building. And that the NIMBY-YIMBY discourse is actually very much distracting from the fact that we, the last three mayors have all been YIMBYs. Every mayor, Eric Adams is King YIMBY, as he says. Has his housing policy been good? No. De Blasio was also a YIMBY. The thing is, he's a different flavor. He tried to spend a lot of money on affordable housing. The problem is, and there's a really good critique of this from Stan Stein, is that it never reached the deep levels of affordability that we needed. And then it focused on building too much housing in a lot of lower income neighborhoods instead of distributing it across the city. And so when we look at the housing crisis that we're currently in, you have to examine the fact that Bloomberg rezoned like a third of New York City, most of it upzoning, some of it downzoning. The irony is that the areas that were downzoned are actually these areas that are being fast-tracked. And those areas that are being fast-tracked are actually affordable. So when you look at this whole dichotomy of saying that everything is about people are against building, no, people are not against building. And so I think there's a lot of people that are not. And so this idea of this notion that there is a pro-housing movement, which is a very right-wing sort of ideology, there's no, I'm pro-housing. I am pro-building more public housing, building more rent stabilization. What you've seen in New York City is that when we built the most housing production is when we built public housing. And so the biggest times in which we built it was after World War II, when we built massive amounts of public housing and social housing. And New York City was a much more affordable place. It was also a segregated place, unfortunately, because, what happened after and our society. But this discourse of just being like, we need to sort of argue over whether we're YIMBY or NIMBY, I think is not really necessary because it's really also much more complicated than that. And if we sort of only see it, which I think this is a problem with these proposals, as just we need to keep building and building out of our way. What we've seen from that strategy over the decades, from Bloomberg to Blasio to Eric Adams, is that we've actually lost deeply affordable housing in rezonings. We've lost deeply affordable housing from rent stabilized apartments being destabilized from pressure and speculation. We've lost deeply affordable home ownership opportunities because there's lots of house flipping in outer borough areas that are dealing with speculation, dealing with increased rent, or increased real estate interest, in their neighborhoods, like East New York or Brownsville. And so, yeah, that's why I think this data set and what Alexa said, like, that's why I think it's really important and incumbent when we talk about narratives around housing, that I appreciate that Alexa does this, and that discussing preservation of the deepest affordable housing that we have. And that's also always included, and not just how much brand new housing is built. Also, it's kind of an irony to say brand new housing, because what we saw from the Fourth Avenue rezoning at Park Slope was that we lost 1,000 units of rent stabilized housing from that rezoning along Fourth Avenue, where you see now the 12 to 15 story upzoning. We lost 1,000 units. And that consideration is not in there of, oh, we built, I think it's 5,000, 6,000 units. It was more than they expected to build. But at the same time, we lost 1,000 units. And that consideration of rent stabilized, I don't know how much beyond rent stabilized, but I know that there was a study from CUF that said, this is why there was so much displacement in Park Slope on Fourth Avenue, because we lost 1,000 units of rent stabilized. And that was not replaced.
So you're emphasizing the idea that if you just build more, supply goes up, price goes down. That's a oversimplification that you're saying, like, the YIMBY conversation
It's not.
reduces it to that. It's not helpful. No. And that there are all these other factors that have.
I mean, because is any market that pure? I mean, I don't want to be so philosophical about this, but like, that's not how real world markets actually work. And also, when you think about it, this is just a purely supply side argument, which amounts to basically sort of a trickle down Reaganomics. And that even on both sides, left and right, Reaganomics has been widely disproven, and a lot of economic. It's a little bit of a fantasy to just be like, housing is so simple, when that all you just build more housing. And then actually, when you look at the map for what's being fast tracked, the areas with the most development in the last 5 years are actually some of the most unaffordable places in New York City. And so what we've seen, so East New York is one of the ones that have built the most. And we're seeing rapid increase in rents because of a lot of that development. And there's a good study from UCLA about intense development and the intensity of development, and how that corresponds to increased rents and gentrification. And I think that's like the consideration of what type of development and how much affordability is in there, that not all development same. And so, yeah.
Would you share that study with the?
Yeah, sure.
I don't wanna go on about too long, but I do think like it is a little bit of both, right? Like the supply is also important, I view that we don't have enough units, we do need to be producing them, but it's not at any expense, right? Like there does need to be attention paid to what was there before, what we're losing. And I think that preservation is often kind of given short shrift, and that people are only paying attention to development. So for me, it's not necessarily that development doesn't play a role, it's just that people know that development plays a role, and that less people don't pay attention to the preservation, which in many cases gets closer to the deep affordability. I was curious about the for outreach about the proposals, because I mean it is coming up. It's next Tuesday. What did you have in mind? And I mean, I don't know how many people are still online, but
Fire plane.
Yeah.
Go over the neighborhood.
I've heard of that.
Oh, right, yeah. Charter plane.
Charter planning, yeah. Great conversation, just trying, and again, just really thinking about how all of this shifts to be. And also just hearing like the back and forth. I did want to highlight the comment that Jeremy made about, how down zoning plays a role. Yeah, with the rezoning, so looking at the data set, document that it's under the section for rezoning, it's on let's see, on page 4. So in 2007, I didn't know that Cypher Heights and Fort Hamilton down zone, to decrease overall residential density. And if you look at the map that Jeremy has pulled up, that's one of the areas I'm highlighted as that hasn't produced, housing within the past 5 years. So they would be fast. But yeah, what is that? Like 15 years ago, they were down zoned. I don't know. I'm just trying to think about, like, we're sitting here having this conversation. Not gonna lie, a lot of it, some of it, like, it can go over people's heads if they're not familiar with these terms. So just trying to think about how we can make conversations like this digestible, fun, and engaging, especially if we can bring in young people, maybe from the high school or the junior high school, just so that they are familiar with, what down zoning is and what has happened in the past has repercussions for what's happening right now currently. So I know we don't have a lot of time today, but, at our next meeting, or, maybe even between them, we can think about how to come up maybe with what topic and make it digestible, so we can plug in more people. And then for Tuesday, we don't have, and, we're gonna be voting on the ballot proposal then. We don't have quorum today, and I couldn't find anything online that, that we could disseminate, to the community, that we could agree upon right now. But what I can commit to is, meeting outside of the committee. I have time on Friday. If you're not, we could talk about that after, folks want to get together, maybe for like an hour or two, post up, maybe do some outreach. I'm committed to doing that. If you're not free, if you could just commit to maybe talking to a neighbor, just talking to one or two people, putting on social media, just getting the word out there that these ballot proposals are something that people will need to flip over to vote on, that would be helpful. But yeah, we could talk about that after, and yeah, I know we're getting near 8 o'clock. I'm sorry if the conversation really went all over the place. We talked a lot about housing proposals and how that will be a shift for next week, but I think, we can see how things pan out next week and then revisit how we can engage, Alexa Vilas and the city council about how these proposals will impact us, because it can't be that we spent all this time putting this together and what leverage does this even hold?
Is there any like flyer or anything already created? Because I could post on my social media. I have a lot.
About the proposals, just
Yeah.
flip it over, go to. No.
Every registered voter got something from the campaign finance board and from, what was it, the New York voters or whatever it's called, which goes through all of, it's neutral, as this community board needs to be, because we're a government agency. But every voter should have gotten that in the mail. Whether or not they choose to read it is another question.
So just a close comment, I would encourage a shared planning document for everyone to be able to contribute ideas and proposals and thoughts, if that's something that the committee would be open to, just a shared document shared with the committee members, where people have an idea, they can put it on that document. Also a shared drive folder for documents like this one,
Every time I bring up my free market pro-build nonsense, Jeremy's like, no, actually, there's a study. We could take the study and we could drop it in the folder and people can have access to that. And even the link to that folder can just be put on the community board website so that anybody could have access to that stuff. I would suggest those things. And I know we're about to leave and we don't have quorum, but I do feel strongly that the land use committee should meet in November on the St. Rocco's rezoning, and that it should include the housing committee. I'm not trying to start a problem, but it should include the housing committee in that meeting, either formally or informally. I would prefer formally, but if not, that it should try to coordinate with the housing committee to discuss it. And I would therefore propose, again, only if people feel like it, that we just express the sense of the committee members in present here that the land use committee should meet in November on St. Rocco's, and that it should include the housing committee in that meeting. And like maybe we could just say, if people want to say this, yes or no, and then that could be conveyed to the chair of land use. And
Hi, I'm Vice Chair of the Land Use. We would like to collaborate. When are you guys having your meeting?
Yes,
In November. We will coordinate. Noted.
Yeah, I mean, I think several of us are on land use too.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's really important. Because again, it's like land use can be more than housing,
Yeah.
but housing is the primary driver. And so, most of the rezonings that we're dealing with are housing rezonings. I mean, land use issues are around housing. Yeah, I think it's really great when people were asking about having the 3 council members. That will be the most fascinating meeting because Susan Twang has probably never really interacted with Alexa Vilas, and that's the one moment where you will actually have a true NIMBY in your presence. That Susan Twang has been, her notoriety is basically opposing a shelter out in her district that's for veterans. So that will be very interesting to hear that perspective because I think,
All 3 of them represent us.
Yeah.
And only 1 or 2 show up to each of our meetings.
Yeah.
So
Susan
get
never
all
comes.
3 of them and answer the questions. And
Yeah.
this is the principles and this is important and there's a lot happening.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that, in some way or another that we're like, you represent a part of our district and it's very rare that you ever come here and have a conversation with us. Whereas, Alexa's office, asked her to come in for housing meetings and she's come in and spent an hour or so and had conversations. Shahana, I feel like would be willing to do the same and should do the same. And I think it then helps our relationship when, like, after we had where that comment, which I was kind of sort of taken aback equally when they mentioned that too, that she said we, didn't give her leverage. And I thought that was surprising because she actually didn't give us leverage because we had no idea what the conversations were going on. And when we met with her land use person, they gave us so little information that we had no idea what kind of deal or speculation was. So as a community board, we were left in the dark. And that's where it was like, hey, I think we were actually more aligned with her than we thought. And she was not revealing that. And then it made it seem like what was going on was that the developer was not speaking to her. That's
It was
what
very defensive.
it was. Yeah.
It was not.
It was not. And that's where I think maybe this meeting too could be helpful in kind of preparing that and being this open thing where we're actually very aligned. Yeah, it's not a debate. And then, the fact that at the end of the day, like, we got more affordability out of the proposal. And, we knew that's what she wanted, but it wasn't clear, like, what conversations were going on and where that was going.
Mm.
And so, a lot of people came out of that being like, this was a win-win, but I do feel like here and in the community engagement process, people in Windsor Terrace felt like the process was not great with Shahana. And I think that's important. So this, like a meeting like that could help kind of bridge those issues that we had with her, which were mainly around communication and engagement and just like a level of transparency that, we went to our land use person and they kind of acted like nothing was going on. And then all of a sudden the deal happens. And to me, that was just frustrating because I'd much rather have them be transparent, saying, we're having these conversations. We can't give you details, but I'm pushing for this affordability. I'm pushing for this.
What are the principles that you have, even if you
Exactly.
haven't written them down?
Exactly. And so yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think that will be a very interesting meeting. And
I'd like to see.
yeah, yeah.
Anybody final word?
Yeah, I remember the meetings that we were having, we were very involved in the designing, how many floors, what should go in in the lower level. We had a conversation and about affordability. And I remember when she actually said that we didn't give her, which was weird because we were involved in a lot of that process.
Okay, I'm going to close today's meeting and then I'll stick around if anybody wants to touch base about meeting up about the ballot proposals for this weekend. Thank you. Okay. I think
We can set stuff.
Yeah.
Email, right?
Yeah.